Hello, my name is Andrew Smuskiewicz, and welcome to the next episode of the Salvation from Destruction podcast. I just wanted to remind everybody to please like and subscribe to my channel because it really helps the channel. Today's guest is retired special agent with the FBI, Carrie Landau. Special Agent Landau dedicated her 21-year career to combating crimes against children and human trafficking. While working with the FBI, Special Agent Landau was a member of the Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team, providing immediate responses to child disappearance investigations, and served as the assistant team leader of the Crisis Negotiation Team, coordinating federal resources and negotiation operations. As the Crimes Against Children coordinator with the FBI Chicago Division, Special Agent Landau spearheaded initiatives like Operation Cross Country, leading to the arrest of traffickers and recovery of victims. Additionally, she has been a part of the Safe Streets Task Force, focusing on crimes against children, including domestic minor sex trafficking. Currently, Special Agent Landau serves as an advisory committee member at Reclaim 13, assisting with policy formulation to improve collaboration between law enforcement and service providers, and contributes to the American Bar Association's Criminal Justice Standards Project, Victims of Crime Task Force. And finally, in 2024, Special Agent Landau opened Landau and Associates, where she provides consulting services for expert testimony and opinions in human trafficking cases. Her company also provides presentation and documentation review for human trafficking investigations. So without further delay, I'd like to welcome to the show Special Agent Carrie Landau. How are you doing, Carrie?
I'm good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thanks for being on. Going back to my old detective days, you and I worked on a couple of cases together where we ran undercover prostitution stings, and we also collaborated with a couple other agencies that were close to us, where we ended up getting a 14-year-old female juvenile who was caught up in human trafficking.
Yeah.
A 17-year-old female out of St. Louis that we ended up helping and trying to get out of that lifestyle. So I just want to dive right in. That's a little bit of a background on you and I and how we know each other. What inspired you to get into the FBI?
It's kind of one of those strange stories where I was taking a aptitude test in 8th grade and came back and said that I should be in some kind of service field and particularly law enforcement. I loved watching all those different kind of, criminal shows. My dad was a court reporter and he would let me come to the courthouse with him. And I was just really intrigued by the criminal justice system itself. It just really interested me. And I always knew that I wanted to help people and particularly kids. But I wasn't sure if I went into the FBI, if I would be able to focus on crimes against children because we have so many different violations that we investigate. So I started off working for the Department of Corrections in Iowa. I worked at a boot camp for juvenile delinquents. I also did some child protective service work for a little while and ended up just really having a fascination with sex trafficking and human trafficking. So when I applied in 2001 after 9/11, like everybody did, and just kind of that call for service for your country, they told me, thanks, but you really need to get a master's degree in order to be competitive because so many people were applying at that time. So I obtained my master's degree, graduated in 2003 in May, and then left for the academy in August of 2003, graduating in 2003 in December. So I knew I wanted to be, like I said, helping and working with kids. And I just loved everything about the FBI from a very young age. So I was super lucky because it's very difficult to get in. And I felt super happy that I had the opportunity.
I know the FBI has so many different avenues and different divisions that you can get into and different types of investigations. How did you get into the human trafficking division?
Yeah, it was interesting. At the academy, we had to do several different projects. And one of the projects, we worked within a group and we essentially presented on sex trafficking. My counselor at the academy it's very strange how they figure out where you're going to end up going. And we call it like the drunken monkey who throws a dart at, the United States and says, congratulations, that's where you're ending up. But she was really good about facilitating conversations with different divisions about what she believed our expertise were and how we would kind of fit into different field offices. So when I was selected to go to Cleveland, at the time, they just thought, you know what, let's have her go to the violent crime squad and work whatever they're working. When I arrived, we were not working any kind of sex trafficking cases. We focused mainly on bank robberies, gangs, drugs, and those types of investigations. But I was fortunate enough, unfortunate for the victim in this case, but to conduct an interview that led to the first ever investigated and prosecuted by the United States Attorney's Office human trafficking, sex trafficking investigation.
Wow.
So, agents, the last thing you really want to do is be on complaint duty. It's kind of known as the day where, maybe less than truthful people appear or have complaints that maybe aren't legitimate. And in this instance, a mother brought her 14-year-old daughter into the FBI, and I happened to be on complaint duty, and the case just went from there. It was a fantastic case. Two individuals were charged and prosecuted, and from there, I became literally obsessed. Shortly thereafter, I was transferred in a mandatory 3-year transfer at the time. The director was very adamant about if you were in a smaller to medium sized office, that then you then go to a bigger office. And I got transferred to Chicago. The good part about that was the crimes against children agent was retiring a couple of months after I arrived. So the transition was actually perfect. And so I ended up at the South Resident Agency, which is a smaller field office outside of Chicago. So we call it a resident agency. And there I just kept on with the trafficking investigations. But we did not have that at the time in Chicago. They had just started thoughts of formulating the Cook County Human Trafficking Task Force, and it was really new to this area. The Violent Crime Squad downtown Chicago, I had helped one of the agents on a trafficking case in Cleveland, also did a couple of interviews for him. He became just like everything I ever wanted to be as an FBI agent. His name is Mark Walschlager, and everything he would teach me and help me along, I was like, became more and more obsessed. And when I say obsessed, like within the job and then outside the job and day in, day out. So just, I loved it. And I loved it because of just the ultimate satisfaction of the recovery of victims.
If you want to explain like that very first case, what was that about?
In that instance, a little girl lived on the west side of Cleveland, and unfortunately, she lived near an individual who was exploiting kids in many different ways. He had promised her a trip to Disney World. They had been talking. Mom had a very low level education. She was around but working, and the daughter kind of took to this older man. And he essentially said, look, come with me. I'll take you to Disney World. And he ended up flying her to Miami with him. And they met up with some other people, where then she was trafficked for about 3 weeks. Took her to different hotels, a house that he had down there. Both guys were actually from the Cleveland area, but were partying and living this pimping lifestyle in Miami. She was brave enough and smart enough to be able to get a hold of her mom and some other family members, get away and get on a bus. It was the first time she had ever actually participated in sex, let alone sex in exchange for money. And first time that she actually had experienced her monthly cycle. And he had her do some things to continue to facilitate sex in exchange for money. It was a pretty rough case. The best part about that case was when we finally found the second individual, the other pimp and trafficker. At the time, I did not know what a grill was. And she was explaining to me a description of this guy. And this story just kind of goes to show you that even a 14-year-old can teach you more than maybe Quantico, Virginia can,
Mm-hmm.
or a master's degree. She explained to me what his teeth looked like and that he had a grill on his teeth. And when we arrested him, she was actually in a little like juvenile placement facility to get some help. And I called her to tell her that we got him in custody. And she's like, "How did you know?" And I said, "Well, when he smiled, he had the diamonds in his teeth." And I said, "Are you Anthony Willis?" And he said, "No." And I said, "It looks like your face." And because he had FACE in his teeth with diamonds. So she was so excited when I called her at the facility to tell her we had him in custody. And she goes, "Carrie, you know what? I think I really actually educated the FBI." I'm like, "You
Oh,
did, girl, you did." So she was super excited about that. And ever since then, I just kept reminding myself that it doesn't matter how much schooling you have. It doesn't matter, you know, what badge you carry. If you listen and you believe victims and you hear what they're saying, that you can really accomplish anything. So that's kind of been my whole feeling on investigating these cases, is that the victims have the answers so long as we listen. But, the manipulation and the preying on the vulnerabilities is what the traffickers hope will lead the victim to not remember and not testify and not be a good witness. And that generally just isn't the case when you develop a rapport with the victim and can kind of work side by side in investigating these cases.
and that was going to be like my next question is how do traffickers recruit and control and exploit these victims?
It's very easy to evade law enforcement and to kind of hide in the shadows. So, even take, for instance, the average hotel clerk. It's very hard for them to see what this is. It can present itself in very different ways. It can look like drug trafficking, and it can look like, promiscuous behavior happening at a hotel. So, really, for minor victims especially, preying on the vulnerabilities that they're lacking in. And it's
Mhm.
it's for adult victims as well, but absolute insistence on reliance on the traffickers. So many ways that they confuse these girls and get them in situations where they're unfamiliar, it's uncharted waters, they don't have any money of their own, they're lacking in education, homelessness, preying on the vulnerabilities of being in the system already with, DCFS, or having parents that aren't around. But we've also seen plenty of victims who have what appears to be a very normal household, that the trafficker can prey on the simplest vulnerability of lack of self-esteem. Drugs and alcohol, prior sexual abuse, and really becoming the primary person in their life and trying their best to facilitate their ultimate goal, which is making money, and off of the backs of minor victims. And I think the difficulty in these cases, more than anything, is how they go about doing that and the love and affection that they provide to young girls that they may be missing in their life otherwise. So the confusion, and coupled with the love and affection, and then sometimes outright fear with beatings and beating other girls in front of them, coupled with substance abuse, it's just a perfect recipe for, again, their ultimate goal of becoming the primary person in their life and enslaving them to make money.
Yeah, I remember when my old partner Dave and I, when we were working an undercover sting, it was so heartbreaking. We caught that 14-year-old girl, and we were able to debrief her and talk to her after the situation. She just said that she was put out by her mother at the time because she was living with her boyfriend. They didn't have room in her apartment. So the mother put her out on the streets, and there was a predator that found her and exploited her. And by the grace of God, we were able to get her away from this gentleman. And we ended up arresting him. I think he ended up getting around 10 years, no early release, and he has to register as a sex offender for the rest of his life. But we were able to get her to a hospital, get her help. And from what we heard not too long afterwards, that she was doing quite well. She was living with her grandma, trying to get her life back together. But when you hear those stories, it is just absolutely heartbreaking to hear that this poor 14-year-old girl was just put out on the streets
Yeah.
and she was just preyed upon. And it's scary and it's sad.
And it's very prevalent. And, it's hard to believe that is happening in our own country. I'll never forget when I first said I was, going into the FBI. My mom didn't necessarily love that idea. And then when I told her I was going to work sex trafficking, she said, "Oh, no, I thought you were going to get to be in Cleveland. Why are you going to have to go to Cambodia?" And it's just, that is kind of the average understanding. They either think it's like the movie Taken, or they think that this only happens in other countries. And as sweet as my mom is, being naive like that is sometimes, I think, even comforting to the average citizen, because we don't want to believe that these things are happening here. There's lots of movies that have been made about the trafficking in other countries, and there's a shortage of understanding in America that this is happening right in front of us. But again, it's very difficult to detect because they're very good at this.
Is there any particular area of the world that you see maybe more victims coming from, or is it mainly domestic?
It's hard to say because I have not participated in any investigations outside of the United States. I've trained people in Sri Lanka, but I will tell you, um, I think, like, for us, what we learned and uncovered in the United States is there is definitely a track of victims, traffickers prey upon in certain areas. When I was in Cleveland, we had a big track coming from Chicago to Detroit to Toledo and then out east. And we also see it from California to Atlanta. And I think more and more, and I could be wrong. I mean, I've only been out for about 7 months, but what we're seeing are more homegrown traffickers, gangbangers who used to just sell drugs, who became keen to serving up, instead of a kilo of cocaine, a repeatable commodity of a juvenile.
Okay.
You throw a juvenile in a hotel, maybe get 4 or 5 hotels, have juveniles involved in this, and have a careful eye on them initially, but then you throw a couple cheeseburgers at them, get their hair and their nails done, and put a quota in front of them, and they're working. And they are, date after date after date coming. And a little of this stopped during COVID, just because I think the fear of the unknown, but there really has been no slowdown. In 2018, Backpage.com was taken down. However, there's just other sites that, come up to take its place. And the unfortunate part is many of those sites don't comply with legal process from any government entity. And so they kind of hide in the shadows as well as the traffickers. So being able to corroborate our victims with evidence related to the trafficking, hotel receipts and cell site data and, applications that attribute the victim with the trafficker are more and more difficult to come by. And the ability for bad people to evade law enforcement, it feels like they're almost one step ahead of us all the time. So that's what's becoming more difficult with these cases.
The one thing that I couldn't get over as well was how technology played a huge role in all this, and how it made it so easy. Ordering one of these girls was as easy, if not easier, than ordering a pizza online.
Totally.
And that's what was astonishing to me. And these are human beings,
Yes.
and this isn't a pizza. This isn't fast food. These are human beings, and they're there. And the people who are handling them, like you said, all they want to do is make money.
Yes.
So, what are some red flags if you're a citizen that's out there? Are there any red flags, any subtle tips, that people could kind of keep an eye out for if they see something that doesn't look right? Or is there anything that the regular citizen can maybe be aware of if they're out somewhere or if they see something?
You know what I think is hard with that is it's always changing the dynamics of this. If you're at a hotel, there may be a situation where you might see someone who just doesn't quite fit with the person they're with. Maybe even for parents or loved ones or someone who's familiar with a child, unexplained assets that they've been able to obtain, clothing, hair done, nails done, and really don't have an explanation for it. As far as kids who aren't coming home regularly and may appear to be not have their story straight, things like that. We'd sit in hotel parking lots and you think, oh, I wonder what's going on over there, and you just don't know until you maybe get involved in a sting operation or a non-government organization reaches out or a parent and says, hey, I think there's something up with my kid. I remember one time getting a call from a mom and she's like, look, my kid tells me that she's going to work for this cleaning service. And she comes home and she's got different hair and she's got different clothes and she's got her nails done. And I'm like, how much money could you be making at this cleaning service? But then she was gone more and more and more and not coming home at night, not coming home on weekends, and involved in substance abuse. And so in that situation, yes, she had a pimp, and oddly and strangely, the pimp actually let her go home, most nights until it got worse and worse and worse. So, yeah, that's, I get like PTSD sitting here thinking about it.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure. How can you not? I remember even when I was working the street and you would get that 911 call that involving a child, your spidey senses always went up and you were always quicker to that call and you wanted to help that child for whatever that they were going through. And like
Totally.
I've said before, and you and I have talked about this several times, I believe that it takes a special person to do what you do and so many of our other associates and friends that we know. I will always tip my hat because a mutual friend that we both have, it's funny because her and I got to talking and she's like, you were a detective and, you worked a bunch of homicide cases. She's like, I don't know how you deal with seeing dead bodies and being on these homicides. And I'm like, wait, what? I don't know how you do what you do every day by working with these child exploitation cases. And to me, it just takes a special person to do what you guys do.
It's interesting because my former partner for 16 years, he is a God fearing man, and I adore him. And one of the things that he used to say is, I think we get into these situations and these cases and things happen to our benefit, and he was a firm believer that God loved what we did, and
Hmm.
so that he was on our side. And not to get too far into that, but I think there's some truth. I mean, we would have things fall in our laps that we would not expect, and all of a sudden it's like, well, how did this all come together? And he's like, I truly believe that he doesn't have us working out here for no reason. If it's 2:30 in the morning, there's a reason, and we're going to find something. And I really liked that because I didn't always have that same level of faith. I was angry a lot about being out in the middle of the night and then something great would happen. And those are like the best years of my life, just getting to be working with my friend and somebody who had that like belief system, because I think it really helped us.
Undoubtedly, it's a God thing too, because I've worked a couple cases and it's the exact same thing. It's undeniable God had his hand in some of these cases that we've worked over the years. And it's funny because my old partner and I, we would talk about it. A bunch of other guys that I used to work with, they're like, this is undoubtedly God. And I do believe that we are doing the Lord's work and you just can't deny it. But so, what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced during these investigations? Was it jurisdictional issues? Was it victim cooperation? Was it just the sophistication of the traffickers? Like, what was some of
Um,
the biggest maybe challenges that you faced working these cases?
I think pretty much initially the hardest hurdles to get over were in large part agencies, different police departments coming together to understand it was what it was, right? That this was actually trafficking. This is not a promiscuous teenager who ran away, maybe so to start with. This was not a throwaway child. This was not something we turn a blind eye to. Initially, it was getting buy-in from the state's attorney's office and the United States attorney's office to work together to combat what was happening constantly at our hotels. And then I think the hardest part was getting the victims to not only cooperate, but to understand what had happened to them, come to terms with maybe why it happened to them, and then undo the trauma that they were faced with, knowing that they had been told for so long that they would amount to nothing if they left the trafficker or if they told law enforcement, and seeing law enforcement as on their side. That was like such a difficult thing to get these victims to understand. And then I thought about it because I got into this and, I told you wanting to become an FBI agent, but I was in a pretty bad relationship once upon a time and I felt trapped, and I never wanted these girls to feel trapped. And I knew what it was to try to get away from something like that and to convince yourself that that's not what was intended for your life. So a lot of times the victims would just feel like, this already happened, and how much better can my life get? Because I'm already in this situation. And, he kept telling me over and over, this is what you were made for, and nobody's going to love you, and those types of things that the victims had so many challenges with. We would even see, and it's in the news, but group homes and places also exploiting these children and taking advantage of them. And so we did a really good thing years back where we Illinois decided, you know what, we don't want to criminalize victims, which I completely agree with. However, we didn't think about what was next. And in our state, we don't have locked facilities for victims. And so we may recover a victim at a hotel at 4 a.m, and the ability to get a forensic interview might not happen for 2 or 3 days. And then we put them in a facility where we wouldn't put our worst enemy and say, okay, we'll be back in 3 days and we're going to come and get you and take you to this forensic interview and then tell us everything that happened. You think about your own past and your own sexual experience. Like, you want to tell that to a perfect stranger? No. And there's maybe no trauma involved. And then we're asking them to be good historians and good witnesses and remember what happened. They're in a hotel room for 2.5 weeks. They don't know where they are. They're originally from Minnesota. They meet this guy at the mall. He says, come over and have a party. And then we're like, okay, so tell us everything that happened. So I say all of that to say at the beginning, you're like, what makes these cases so difficult? And it's all of that coupled together. And then we have them tell their story one time to a forensic interviewer, and then again to the grand jury, and then again at trial. And they all talk about, and we all talk about not re-victimizing victims. But the truth is that an offender has a right to face his accuser, and that is going to be a thing where they need to testify. And so then reliving that. And sometimes it's a very cleansing experience for the victim, but sometimes it's very difficult. And I think that's when I struggled the most with fighting with my prosecutors, because I would be like mama bear all over the victims, not wanting to stress them out and, cut time from them being prepped for trial. But undoubtedly, traffickers more often than many cases take their cases to trial because they don't believe the victims are going to come forward, and they don't believe that they're strong enough to do so. And so sometimes, that would be very empowering for the victims when I would tell them, like, I don't think you're coming. They don't believe that you're strong enough. And when they would finish testifying, they'd say so many funny, great things that I just loved. And there was one situation where a girl, a non-government organization, had told her, when you're sitting there and you're testifying in the witness chair, think that every question the prosecutor asks you is just like another drop from the shower that is cleaning you. And below your chair is a drain. And that every drop of water and every question that hits you is taking this away from your body, and it's flushing it and allowing for yourself to recover and to get over it. And so when she got done testifying, I'm like, hey, how do you feel? Like, I know that was rough. It was a long day. And she's like, I feel squeaky clean. I feel
Oh,
squeaky clean. It was really cool because, sometimes you're sitting there and you're like, oh, okay, I'm a law enforcement officer. And I'm like, I don't know if that analogy worked with her. She's pretty tough. She's been on the streets for a while. And then when she said that, and I said, what do you mean? And she said, yeah, every question that got asked of me, it was like a drop of water. And she's like, I'm squeaky clean. She's like, and did you see his face? He was shocked that I was there. Those are like the best moments.
that's
And
great.
yes, yes. When the victim feels better, when the prosecutor is engaged in your case and they know how to treat your victims, that was probably another very frustrating part. We had to do what we had to do as far as getting these cases through the court system. And what I mean by that is there would be a lot of different entities that would have opinions on how we should handle who should work these cases. I was of the mindset that reinventing the wheel constantly was not a good idea. And I came from a school of thought where I thought, it'd be really nice to have the same prosecutor for all of my cases so that he and I got each other or she and I got each other and they understood how to talk to victims. And that just wasn't always the case. But I will tell you, 99% of the time, I worked with the best prosecutors who ended up loving these girls and, being great role models to these girls. I can think of so many cases where afterwards, like the victim would say to me, like, I hope I can be like Chris one day. I hope I could be like Jill. And I know that I could be a really good attorney. And then that's when like, okay, this was full circle and everybody kind of got on, team victim, team USA. And those are my favorite.
That was actually going to be my next question is how did you establish rapport with these victims? Because a lot of times, like during my experiences, usually when we're doing these undercover operations, they're primarily male dominated. And when we go in these hotel rooms and we do these takedowns, this poor girl who's already being victimized is now being faced with 4, 5, 6 guys all in her face, wanting to know what's going on, who brought her, asking her all these questions. And I also like when you would come out and you would work with us because you were a female face, a calming voice. And the way that you handled these women and these girls that I saw, which resonated with me, is you kind of took them off either in another room or another area of the room and you just talked to them. And we talked to them. But there's a time where as investigators, you just need to take a step back and let the people who really know how to work and just let them do what they know how to do, which was in your case, that's what you did and that's what you were good at. So I guess my question is like, how did you formulate that approach? How do you approach these victims to get them to relax, to get them to give you the information that you need to go after the pimps or the handlers?
I think one of the best approaches that both my partner, I really liked having a male partner. We both brought something different to the table. A lot of times, what we would see is these young girls who didn't really have a father figure. And so they really looked up to my partner, Barker, at the time. They loved him and they grew attached to him, sometimes in not great ways. I mean, where they were very overbearing and needy with him. But what I will tell you from my perspective, and he and I made this decision when we first started working together, was we are never, ever, 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 ever going to lie to a victim. We're going to tell them how bad it's going to suck. We're going to tell them we don't know how long this case is going to take. We can't make you any promises. What we can promise is we're going to fight for you. We're going to work as hard as we can. We're never going to not call you back. We're never going to leave you somewhere where you feel like we're against you, we're for you, and we're going to do everything we can to help you. And it took time to establish that. I always say that in that instance that you talked about, 4 guys in your face and there's a sting operation, that is not the best time to get information
Right.
because they've already been trained to lie to us. They've been convinced that we're the enemy. And so then we're asking for information many of the times to preserve evidence in the situation. which is what we have to do. And then that would get a little sticky too with non-government organizations or child advocacy centers because, along came the absolute need and mandatory requirement for interviewing victims with a forensic interviewer, which is understandable. We all know people that we wouldn't want to interview a victim or talk to a victim, but we also know that a lot of us would not do anything on purpose to hurt an investigation, but it's in that heat of the moment that, like you said, take a step back, let's see what the big picture is. 99% of the time, the girls have not eaten in days. They have not slept in days. So giving them an opportunity to get their thoughts together, and that part of my interview strategy and talking with victims happened over time. I will say that initially it was like, okay, let's take them back to the PD. Let's talk to them. Let's see what's happening. And then realizing that we should work collaboratively, like a multidisciplinary approach. I developed such good rapport and relationships with the advocacy centers and with the non-government organizations, knowing, like you said, so many people who can bring something different to the table. One thing that we really were proud of is establishing, like with Will County Child Advocacy Center, they ended up like having this emergency response team that would immediately drop everything and would come and do an interview if we needed them to do an interview that night or the next morning. Different organizations that have offered for the girls to stay there. Working with Cook County Sheriff's Department, there was a trailer set up where the girls could just sleep and eat, and then we would do an interview. Sometimes right after you recover a victim, you have to take them to the hospital, and you could be there for 7 to 8 hours. I mean, we as investigators and they as the victims have no business conducting any kind of interview.
Right.
So it would take time. And interestingly, today I had an inbox message from a victim asking me for help. And that's from a case from 2016. And we're in 2025. And there's a lot of different theories on boundaries. I am not great with boundaries. I'm not going to lie. I would work really hard to maintain the boundaries before the case was over. But once the case was over, I have relationships with these girls who we were all that they had. And I don't mean that in a egocentric kind of way, but when they're in a facility or they're in a situation where they don't have family, they want to tell us what's happening. And we've been to graduations and we've been to weddings, and those moments are things that like I hang on to. Of we couldn't help everybody, we couldn't recover everybody, but it mattered to some of them and it made a difference. So that rapport building takes time, and it takes you not lying. Everybody else in their life has lied to them. I know that was the last thing they ever wanted, was to be lied to.
If you had to pick one thing that you wish more people knew about human trafficking, what would it be?
For us to believe that this is like a third world problem is pretty close-minded. And that if you have the opportunity to help any of the organizations that focus on trafficking, you should. I think also that building your kids up, boys, girls alike, with self esteem and feeling confident in who they are and knowing that they're worth more than any person telling them they love them, but then exploiting them in that way. That if we as like parents and community members can engage with our kids so that other people aren't lurking in the shadows to do so.
What are some organizations or some resources that you would recommend for people to get involved with?
Here in the Chicago area, and they are one of our most fantastic groups that we work with is Reclaim 13. And the reason that it's called that is the average age of a individual to be involved in being trafficked is 13 years old. And they came up with that name to reclaim the lives of 13-year-olds and other kids too. They just do a great job with mentoring. They have a house for transitional living after they have been in a place called Cherish House, and they are just fantastic. Everything that they stand for, everything that they do, I support them wholeheartedly. My daughter sings at their gala every year. They started from the ground up 11 years ago, and I remember when I first heard about it and said, would like you to meet with this doctor, and she has a dream about a house where victims will be. And I was like, blah, blah. Yeah, right. I'm like, I haven't seen this before. And it is real and it is amazing. So definitely that organization. I would also say if you see something, to call in to the national hotline, the human trafficking hotline. National Center for Missing and Exploited Children does an unbelievable job with their child sex trafficking unit to help law enforcement and to get tips out, as well as provide a lot of training. They're phenomenal. It's interesting because we had such fantastic victim specialists with the FBI, and not every police department is lucky enough to have a social worker or somebody who works with victims. And all of those resources that we would have, we'd be in the midst of trying to find the bad guy, and we're like, okay, we got the victim stable. Now we've got to figure out how to get the victim somewhere, and where is she going to be for the night, and what resources do we have. And we were so lucky with that. And it just more and more and more, the evolution of services coming out was fantastic. We had a case that happened back in 2016 where a young girl had been missing for only a few days. She was trafficked in Markham, Illinois, and ultimately murdered. We worked collaboratively with the South Suburban Major Crimes Task Force, who were investigating the murder of the young girl. And we had just provided a training to multiple law enforcement agencies, and we received a call from one of those detectives who was on South Suburban Major Crimes and said, Carrie, we have a young girl who was murdered, but we do believe that she was involved in trafficking. It was a difficult start to the investigation just because of the different moving parts with state's attorneys involved, and, the fear regarding messing up maybe the murder investigation. So long and short, I met some of the most amazing people in that case. The mother of the victim was fortunate enough to be able to sign into legislation the FOSTA SESTA Act, which was happened back in 2018. So it made it illegal to sell kids online, and Backpage.com was shut down. Her name is Yvonne Ambrose. Yvonne became this fantastic advocate for stopping sex trafficking at the unfortunate demise of her daughter being killed during this case. And I've never seen anything like it. We went to trial, and she hugged every single person that testified on behalf of prosecution of the sex trafficker in the case. And Yvonne Ambrose is just an example of a mom who never gave up on her kid. And this can literally happen to anybody. And the message that I want with that is, this is not a child who had a ton of problems. She was going to school, met an individual who took her to a party, and 27 days later, her life ended. The absolute unbelievable investigation, partnering with so many different South Suburban agencies in Chicago, along with the unbelievable prosecutor in the case. It's interesting. And with the success story, I'll say, like, as much as we talk about a bond that a trafficker and a victim have while being trafficked, while investigating these cases, you develop a bond with the people, because it's just something that you're going through and nobody else can really ever understand. The prosecutor in that case has become one of my best friends, and we worked several cases together. And watching as the mom was able to explain to the prosecutor who her daughter was, and bringing her voice to light in the courtroom, was just incredible. She had been beaten and her throat was slit, and the police department at Markham, the fantastic investigation that they did for the murder that then led to the sex trafficking investigation. I just can't say enough about it. So, but with that, it takes a toll. And these cases definitely take a toll. I still went 8 more years without saying how bothered I was by some of these things. But, there is such a thing as vicarious trauma. And sometimes after I even give a presentation or talk about this stuff, it's like, wow, that had a real toll on me, a real toll on my family. So there were struggles there for a little while. And it was hard to tell anybody at the FBI or anybody what you're going through. That's one of the biggest messages too that I want to get out is like, it's okay. And I know it's such a cliche saying, but like, it's okay to not be okay. But that we need to talk about that more. And we need to allow for our people to have a break. And then also after a big case, like give people a few days off and let them digest and regroup. Sometimes I would leave my house to go for a 5-minute run after I decided other ways weren't working. And I would return 2.5 hours later and I would just run until I couldn't think about the stuff anymore and get it out of me, essentially. But that's the one thing that I do believe with these cases. I had the longest career to be able to compartmentalize this. It didn't really affect me until the very end. And then I just knew it was time. It was time to just take a minute and yeah, kind of regroup. But
And there's nothing wrong with that. And it's that stigma that we have to, as a department, as individuals, as agencies, we have to get over that stigma. It's okay to say, you know what, I just had enough. I need a break here. It doesn't mean that you're broken. It doesn't mean that you can't operate. It doesn't mean that you can't do your job. It's like anything else. It's like your brain also and your soul get tired as well. And
yes,
we have to just check in with our people, see how they're doing. And if you're seeing that someone's maybe just acting not themselves, check in with them, ask them. And I'd be surprised on what people will tell you once you just ask them, hey, how are you? What's going on? That's why I retired, is I
yeah,
just knew that after a certain number of years, it was just time for me to leave and focus on myself, focus on my family again, and start living life.
for sure.
And there's nothing wrong with it. And then even after you leave, for at least for me, is when all that baggage and all that trauma came to the forefront of my mind. And that's where I knew, and I was blessed to have the family and the friends around me that understood, where I just needed time just to decompress and
Yes,
relax and, face a lot of these things in my own way through the grace of God, and getting into my Christian faith and being around my family and being able to talk to my wife and my dear friends. I was able to face it and get over it. It'll always be there.
yes,
I'm sorry, this job and these things that we do and these things that we experience, there's a part of our souls that we'll never get back. But, I do believe we do the Lord's work, and we did what we were supposed to do and why we were on this planet. But there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, I'm just tired. I need a break. Or if you just need to completely walk away from it, no matter how long you've been on the job, no matter what agency you've been on, there's no shame in that anymore. And I just wish that, agencies and departments and people could just kind of maybe get over that stigma. It's okay to say that you're just tired.
yeah, yeah. And that's part of it too, is just hard charging for so long and not really even realizing. You almost become like you're
Uh-huh.
on automatic, you're a robot. Interestingly, after one of my big cases in Indiana, that was at the very beginning of working these cases. So it was like 2010. My husband and I went on vacation and we would do the same thing every time we would go to Florida. We would get a 6-pack of Corona Lights and we would find a place to get chicken wings. And I couldn't eat, I couldn't drink, I couldn't sleep, nothing. And he's like, "What is wrong with you?" I'm like, "I just went through 6 months of prepping for a 3-week trial, multiple defendants, and all I heard all day, every day was about rapes and beatings and trafficking." I'm like, there's something wrong with me. And during that vacation, it was a week long, I threw up and I was not sick with the flu. It was like detoxing from ugly. And you think about that. And I didn't know it then what it was, but it was vicarious trauma. Listening to that day in and day out and worrying about the victims and being scared for them and their safety. And what if he gets out? And what if we mess this up? And there's just so much on you, And then my husband's an FBI agent. And so I would come home, and luckily I had a partner who worked this with me day in and day out, but I would come home and my husband's like, well, so tell me about your day. Oh my Lord, that's the last thing I want to talk about. And so then I'd get silent at home, and that became a problem. I wouldn't want to talk about it. Or you'd go see friends that you hadn't seen in a while from your hometown, and they'd say, tell me about your craziest case. And you're like,
Yeah.
that's the last dang thing I want to talk about. More than anything, when I would see my friends, I'm like, let's just be crazy and have fun. I don't want to talk about this stuff.
Right.
And they're trying to be supportive, but it became like, don't ask me anything. I would come home on Fridays and I would say, no one in this house say the 3 letters. No one say FBI. Okay. Like until Sunday, when we're getting ready to get ready for the week, nobody even mention it. And then I realized that was bad for my husband because he didn't have a partner. He wanted to talk about some stuff. And I'm like, then I had to be a good wife.
Yeah, and that's the hard part too, is it's like you see the things that we see, and you're still expected to be a mom, a dad, a husband, a wife, and it's no offense to anybody in your family. They're the ones that are there for you at the end of the day, and they worry about you and they care about you. But again, it's how do you see the things that we've seen, and then you only have maybe a half hour, 45 minutes to an hour ride home, and you try to process everything that you've seen in that time. And then when you walk in the door, you try to be that husband or that wife or that mom or that dad. And it's just, and when you're sitting on the couch and you're trying to decompress and you're just kind of off in la la land, and
Yeah.
my wife would go, are you okay, or how was your day? And I would just kind of give her a look, and she
Yeah.
knew. And after being with her now for 7 years, she knew towards the end of my career, as soon as I'd hit that door, what kind of day I had. I didn't have to say anything,
Yeah.
just
For
by a
sure.
look.
Yeah.
Just my wife just started seeing a change in me. Same thing, just like you, just being cold and just being kind of distant and just kind of going through life. It was just time, and I just knew that I was just tired,
Yeah.
and it was time to go.
Yeah.
For me, it was the best decision I ever made.
Yeah, I'm still struggling with it. I mean, I miss it every day, but I'm fortunate because, um, you know, I feel like I went at the right time. I was working 90 hours a week at the end. I'd come home and I'd still work at night. And that got to be very difficult because the fear of not documenting something or not following up on a tip, that became, you know, do I feel guilty that I'm not spending time with my kid, or do I feel guilty that I didn't write that last thing down and that last
Uh,
report? And my daughter's a junior in high school, and they say, oh, it goes so fast. I have one
does.
more year with her. And luckily, since retiring, I've made almost every one of her softball games, and I haven't missed things because of, sadly, other kids and other problems and other issues related to my job.
So lastly, I want you to talk about your business. I think
Okay.
that's great that you're still, carrying on and trying to do something again to still help victims in human trafficking. Go ahead and explain your business for us, if you don't mind.
Yes. So in September of 24, I established Landau and Associates, and it is a human trafficking consulting business. So far, I have testified for the federal government now 16 times as an expert witness in human trafficking. In that realm, 3 times since being retired. So I did it as a collateral duty in furtherance of knowing that's something that I wanted to do in retirement. I also do it because there are just so many people who don't understand the dynamics of sex trafficking. And so I testify blindly in the case. I don't know any facts about the case, and I will provide information about how sex trafficking happens, kind of what we talked about, the methodology and the vulnerabilities of victims and the recruitment tactics of traffickers. I really like that part of testifying. You don't have to remember, when I arrested the bad guy, the gun was in the right pocket. It's talking about something you love anyway. So I'm doing that now. I'm reviewing documents for different attorneys, assisting in some cases with some different law firms, and I just love it. That decision to make my own business, I didn't know that I would know how, but luckily I had a few friends and my neighbor who had started his own pizza business, which is great too, helped me to establish it. So, and that's one thing that I want to continue. I'm doing a few presentations around the area. That's kind of what everybody's always looking for, right? What are the warning signs of human trafficking and the presentations, and how can we, train different people? I always say, like, the best way to train police departments is to say, okay, call me when you get your next trafficking case, and then let's work a case together, which I was so lucky to do with so many South Suburban officers and detectives across this area, 120 police departments. And, that you asked about the frustrations too, is like, man, there were two of us in the federal government, FBI working trafficking with 120 police departments. It was busy, and we would work all day, and then we'd get a call
Mhm.
4 or 5 times a week at 2 in the morning.
Yep. I remember those days. So,
Yes.
so where can people reach you? What is your website, email, telephone number, whatever you want to leave?
Yep. Landau and Associates. So Landau and Associates, and then it's Carrie at landauandassociates.com. And they can reach me at 216-533-4337. And I would love to consult on a case. Even, I've thought a lot about brand new agents or brand new detectives who just need to run a case by anything like that. So
No, that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that.
I've kind of lived my whole life through this starfish story, and that's kind of part of my LLC as well. Is when I first started working trafficking cases, I had even other detectives, law enforcement officers say, what are you doing? Like, these girls want to be out there. They're promiscuous. They're dressed like that. You can't tell me this is a good use of your time or a good use of the federal government money and, our squad. And my answer back to them was like, do you know the starfish story? Little boy's on the beach, and there's so many starfish that have washed up, and he's walking along, and an old man says to him, what are you doing? Why are you throwing those back? And he says, I'm throwing them back because if I don't, what's going to happen to them? They're going to wash up here and they're going to die, and it's hot out. And he throws one back and it swims away, and he's like, man, you're never going to get to all of these. There's a million of these washed up on the shore. You're not going to make a difference. And one gets thrown back in by the little boy and it swims away, and he said it mattered to that one. I always thought, like, there's such a high recidivism rate for individuals involved in sex trafficking to go back to it. And there's so many reasons for that. But I always think, like, if it touched one life and it mattered for one kid and it got one trafficker off the street, then it mattered. And that's just like, I'd like more people to think about that and not assume that somebody's in a situation that they want to be in.
That and that's true. It's so true. If you just help just one of these victims, it's a victory. So, Carrie, I just wanted to say thank you again for being on this podcast. I really appreciate your time. I know you're busy, with everything going on with your family and in your work and your business. And yeah, if anybody has any questions, comments, please reach out to Carrie. And I'll put all of Carrie's information down in the description. And as always, all my information will be down in the description. So once again, thanks for listening, and take care of yourself.